The wind tore through the pines, whipping snow across the jagged mountains like shards of glass. Rhett Marston's boots crunched in rhythm with his own heartbeat as he pressed forward, rifle tight in his hands. Weeks of tracking Dagger Sloan had led him here, into the teeth of a storm that could freeze a man alive. Every instinct screamed caution. Every thought screamed revenge. The cabin appeared like a black wound in the white landscape, half buried under drifts, smoke curling weakly from the chimney. Rhett's pulse spiked. This was at the outlaw's hideout. He slowed, scanning the perimeter. No footprints except his own, snow already covering any tracks he might have missed. He kicked the door. Locked, his rifle rose. Dagger Sloan, come out. His voice carried, sharp against the wind, but only the howling answered it inside. The cabin was dark, and shadows pooled in corners. Rhett's eyes adjusted slowly. And then movement. A figure at the table, hunched, delicate hands clutched around something small and shiny. His heart stopped. Who's there? Rhett barked, stepping inside, rifle aimed. The woman thin, her hair tangled, her clothes dusted with frost froze. And in her hand, his sister's locket. Rhett's jaw went tight. His sister. Years ago, buried in a shallow grave in the Montana hills, lost to him forever. And now, this stranger held it like a talisman. She looked up, eyes wide, gray and wary, scanning him as though deciding whether he was predator or prey. I found it, she whispered. Her voice cracked like thin ice underfoot. On him. The man you're hunting. Rhett's mind spun, chest tightening. Every fiber of him wanted to believe she was lying. Every memory screamed otherwise. He stepped closer, rifle lowering slightly, hands trembling. Where, how? His voice was rough, low, and dangerous. She shook her head, wrapping her fingers tighter around the locket. I don't know. I swear. He left it behind. He's coming back tonight. The words hit him like a punch. The outlaw Dagger Sloan wasn't gone. He'd planned to return. And somehow this woman had pulled him into the orbit of something Rhett wasn't ready to face. Stay where you are, Rhett said, but his voice lacked conviction. He scanned the room. Sparse furnishings, a wooden table, 2 chairs, a bed rolled in furs, a stove with cold ashes. No signs of struggle. No hint that a man had been here recently, aside from the locket. Her fingers trembled as she held it out. I didn't take it. I found it. I thought maybe it belonged to someone. Rhett's eyes narrowed. Her innocence or her fear was hard to read. But the locket burned a memory into him. Laughter and sunlight, a little hand slipping into his, the promise he'd never fail her. He swallowed hard. The storm outside beat against the walls, snow piling against the door like nature itself was trying to trap them. You stay here, he said, not a question but an order. Don't touch anything. Don't move. Understand? She nodded, almost imperceptibly, eyes fixed on him like a doe cornered. Her breath puffed in the cold cabin air. Rhett moved to the window, pressing his face against the glass, squinting through the swirling white. Tracks too faint to be sure. He could feel it, he could sense the outlaw approaching. The wind howled a warning. But Rhett's focus narrowed to the cabin, the woman, the locket, the past clawing into the present, and then a branch, snapped outside, sharp, too deliberate to be random. Rhett's hand went back to his rifle. Heart hammering, he gestured toward the woman. If he comes through that door, we survive together. Don't step out. She swallowed, nodding again, but the terror in her eyes mirrored his own. He didn't trust her or himself, but there was no time to think. The wind slammed against the cabin like a drumbeat. Snow rattled the roof. Somewhere in the storm, Dagger Sloan was coming back. And Rhett Marston knew this night would change everything. He tightened his grip on the rifle and whispered, more to himself than to her, let him come. The cabin shivered under the storm. Outside, the silence between the blizzard gusts felt endless. Then a faint crunch of boots and snow. Someone was there. Someone was coming. Rhett didn't take his eyes off the door. Each gust of wind rattled the cabin like a hammer against his ribs. He could hear the snow shifting outside, faint crunches that might be nothing or everything. His hands flexed around the rifle, knuckles white. The woman, Nora Hawley, sat stiffly on the edge of the fur-covered bed, her gaze darting between him and the window. Every time the wind howled, she flinched. She was tense but not weak. There was fire in her, buried beneath fear, and Rhett could sense it. "Name's Nora," she said quietly, almost apologetically, as though speaking would expose her more than silence. Rhett grunted, not lowering his rifle. Fine, name's Marston. Don't get used to me asking again." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I didn't expect company. Least of all him." She glanced down at the locket again. "I didn't take it. I found it on him. The man you're hunting." He clenched his jaw. The locket burned in her hand like a ghost. "Dagger Sloan," he muttered. The name sounded like ice-scraping stone. "You said he's coming back?" She nodded. "Tonight, he always comes back for something." Her voice faltered, and she hugged her knees closer. Rhett studied her, noting the calluses on her hands, the way she moved with careful, practiced economy. She had survived out here long before him. She wasn't a victim, but she was trapped, and that made her dangerous. Rhett's gaze drifted to the rest of the cabin. Sparse but functional. A knife beside the stove, an axe leaning against the wall, a pile of firewood in the corner. Everything had purpose. Nothing was left to chance. "Stay put," he said again. "I'm searching." She didn't argue. That in itself told him something. He moved methodically, checking each corner, peering behind stacks of wood, into the shadowed recesses. There was no sign of dagger, no note, no trace. Yet every instinct in Rhett's body screamed that the outlaw had been here, and would return. The storm outside intensified. Snow slapped against the small windows, blocking the view of the surrounding pines. Rhett adjusted the boards he'd nailed across the frames, each hammer strike echoing through the cabin. It was mundane, mechanical work, but it grounded him. For a few moments he wasn't thinking about the past, or the locket, or Sloan, just the cold wood, the echo of metal, the rhythm of survival. Nora watched silently, her hands folded in her lap. Occasionally she reached for a board, helped him steady it, her movements deliberate and careful. Rhett noticed. He didn't trust her, but he respected her. Survival required more than luck. It required grit. Minutes passed, stretched into hours. The wind roared, like some unseen beast prowling the mountains. The snow piled higher, masking tracks, erasing evidence. And then a faint scrape at the door. Almost imperceptible. Rhett froze. The sound came again, deliberate this time. Not random. Not wind. He signaled to Nora, his hand sharp, slicing through the tense air. She froze, eyes wide, breath caught. He approached the door slowly, rifle raised, heart thumping in rhythm with the storm. Whoever or whatever was out there had been waiting for this moment, waiting for him to slip, to underestimate, to falter. A shadow flickered behind the frosted window. Rhett swung the door open, but it was only a branch, bent by the wind, snapping against the threshold. Relief and frustration surged together. "Storm's making tricks," he muttered. "Keep your eyes open. Move as little as possible." Nora nodded, swallowing hard. Her throat worked silently. There was fear there, yes, but also determination. Survival, Rhett realized, wasn't just his domain. She had lived alone in these mountains long enough to know how to fight it, to know how to survive. He might not trust her yet, but he needed her alive tonight. Rhett returned to the stove and stoked the fire, flames dancing across the cabin's walls, casting shadows that seemed to flicker like figures in the storm. The warmth was small, temporary. Outside, the storm raged, erasing every trace of the trail he had followed for weeks. And somewhere in that white wilderness, Dagger Sloan was moving closer. Nora broke the silence, voice barely more than a whisper. "He knows I've been here." Rhett's gaze hardened, muscles coiling like springs. "Then we wait. And we survive, together." The wind slammed against the cabin again, louder this time, a promise of the danger to come. Somewhere in the swirling snow, Sloan's shadow moved toward them. And Rhett knew the night had only just begun. The fire crackled, a small island of warmth against the storm's fury outside. Rhett sat on the edge of the bed, rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the dark corners of the cabin. He could hear her breathing steady, wary, careful. Nora broke the silence first. "I didn't ask him to stay," she said softly, almost to herself. He just appeared, needed a place to hide. He left something behind, something I'm scared to touch. Rhett's eyes narrowed. Something like what? She hesitated, swallowing. Her fingers toyed with a loose thread on the fur covering the bed. A package, wrapped in oilcloth. I don't know what's inside, but he made it very clear I wasn't to open it. Rhett's jaw tightened. His mind raced. Outlaws had plans, secrets, traps. Whatever she had stumbled across could be a weapon or a death sentence. "You stay here tonight," he said, voice low, almost a growl. "I'll keep watch." "I don't want your protection," she snapped, eyes flashing. Then, almost immediately, the fire in her gaze dimmed. "But I don't want to die." Rhett studied her. She was small, slight, but there was steel beneath the fear. It reminded him painfully of his sister Headstrong, unwilling to bow to the world's cruelty. And now he had to guard this stranger as if she were his own. The wind shrieked outside, rattling the cabin, and the faint crunch of snow against wood made both of them flinch. The storm was relentless, a living thing, hiding dangers in its white folds. Rhett made a decision. They would wait together. They would survive together because there was no alternative. "All right," he said finally. "We do this together. I watch the door. You stay in here. No surprises. You do what I say, I do what I say. Understand?" She nodded, small and tense. "I understand." Rhett gestured toward the small stove. "We need heat. Fire's life here." He set about tending it, feeding the flames with kindling. The glow painted shadows on the walls, flickering across her face. She watched him silently, studying his motions, the precision in the way he worked, the methodical care in every movement. Minutes passed. The storm outside roared and the cabin groaned under the weight of snow. Rhett's eyes never left the doorway, yet he felt her presence like a pulse beside him. The tension was raw, electric, two strangers forced together by necessity, their distrust barely held in check. Finally, she spoke again, voice quiet. You bury a lot, don't you? Emotions, past?" Rhett stiffened, refusing to look at her. He didn't answer. She didn't press. Silence hung between them, heavy with the storm, with memory, with guilt. Hours passed like this. They worked in quiet synchronization. He reinforced the door with boards, she stacked firewood, and checked the stove. Every sound from outside, the snap of a branch, the groan of ice-laden pines, made them both flinch. Every creak of the cabin floor was a reminder of the peril waiting beyond the walls. Then, a distant crack of gunfire echoed through the valley. Both of them froze. Rhett's eyes narrowed. Nora's hands gripped the edge of the bed, knuckles white. The storm could hide more than snow. And somewhere in that vast white wilderness, Sloane was moving. Closer. Calculating. Rhett finally spoke, voice low, gruff. "You've got to tell me everything you know about him. No lies. No hiding." She hesitated, biting her lip. "I don't know much. He didn't trust me. He didn't mean to hurt me. I think he's trying to protect something." "Protect something?" Rhett's tone was skeptical. His eyes searched hers, trying to pierce the layers of fear and survival. She nodded. "I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, he'll come back for it. And if he finds me with you..." Rhett's hands tightened on the rifle. "Then we fight," he finished for her. She flinched at the bluntness, but a spark of resolve passed through her. They were no longer strangers. No longer two separate lives caught in a snowstorm. They were a unit reluctant, wary, but united by survival. The wind shrieked louder, rattling the boards they'd nailed in place. Snow slapped against the cabin walls like a warning. And in that hollow, fragile warmth of the fire, a fragile alliance had formed. Rhett glanced at Nora, her hands clenched around the fur on the bed. "Tonight," he said, voice low, "we stay alive. That's all that matters." Her lips pressed together, a small, stubborn nod. Neither trusted the other yet, but both understood one truth. The storm outside wasn't their only threat. And when Sloane returned, there would be no room for hesitation. The fire crackled, shadows danced, and the cabin waited, tense and silent, for the night to unfold. The storm hadn't relented. Snow hammered the cabin from every angle, wind shrieking like a wild animal, and Rhett Marston found himself glued to the window, eyes scanning the white expanse outside. Every shadow, every swaying branch felt like a threat. Nora moved quietly behind him, stacking firewood with careful precision. She didn't speak, didn't ask, but Rhett could feel her presence steady, deliberate. Her movements were efficient, almost graceful, a contrast to the rough edges of the cabin and the wildness outside. "Pass me that axe," Rhett said, his voice rough but low. She handed it over, and their hands brushed briefly. He didn't pull away, and for a moment neither spoke. A flicker of something unspoken passed between them. Trust? Recognition? The acknowledgement of shared danger. "Been surviving out here long?" he asked, keeping his tone casual, though his heart still thumped against his ribs. "Long enough," she said, eyes focused on the woodpile. "You learn what matters. And what doesn't." Rhett nodded. He didn't ask what mattered to her. He already suspected it had something to do with staying alive, with keeping secrets, by avoiding attachments that might cost too much. He knew the type, had seen it in his sister. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the fire casting warm, flickering light on their faces. The storm's howl made the cabin feel suspended between two worlds, the violent outside, and this small, fragile interior where they were forced to coexist at some point. Nora broke the silence, her voice quieter than the fire's crackle. "You're not like him, are you?" She glanced at him, hesitant, almost fearful. "I mean the outlaw. You don't just use people to survive." Rhett stiffened. His jaw tightened. "No," he said finally, voice rough, controlled. "I survive, but I don't take what isn't mine. Not if I can help it." She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to read the truth behind the words. Then she turned back to the fire, her hands busy, though her breathing had slowed. The tension between them, raw and electric earlier, began to ease into something else, cautious understanding. A sudden crack echoed outside, gunfire, distant but unmistakable. Both flinched. Rhett's hand went instinctively to his rifle. Nora froze, then quietly moved beside him, peering through the frosted window. Their shoulders brushed and neither moved away. "Stay here," he said softly, though the command had lost its edge. "I'm staying," she replied. And for the first time it sounded like agreement rather than compliance. The wind howled again, rattling the walls, but the storm was no longer just a menace. It became a backdrop for something else, the slow tightening of an invisible thread between them. Rhett watched her as she checked the fire, adjusted the fur on the bed, moved with quiet efficiency. And he realized he was not only protecting her, he was paying attention to her, really noticing her in a way he hadn't allowed himself in years. Minutes stretched. Words became fewer, gestures heavier with meaning. Rhett handed her a cup of warmed tea, and their fingers brushed again. Neither pulled back this time. She took the cup, holding it with both hands, letting him see the tremor in her grip. "You're not so bad at this," she said, a small, dry smile tugging at her lips. "Neither are you," he replied, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. It was the first time he had allowed a shadow of warmth to cross his face since the mountains had swallowed him. A long silence settled over them, punctuated by the crackle of the fire and the storm's relentless roar. In that small cabin, surrounded by snow and shadows, something shifted. Trust began to root itself in tiny gestures, passing wood, sharing firelight, meeting eyes without fear. And then, in the distance, a single gunshot cracked through the night. Not close, not threatening, yet, but close enough to remind them both. Survival wasn't certain, and their fragile alliance would soon be tested. Rhett's gaze returned to the window, then to Nora, who met his eyes without flinching. They were no longer two strangers forced together. They were partners, at least for tonight. And in the quiet heat of the cabin, amid the storm's wrath, that small, stubborn bond began to feel like hope. Outside, the snow continued to fall, relentless and blinding. But inside, the fire burned, and in its light, they were not alone. Not yet. Dawn arrived gray and brittle, slicing through the storm's aftermath. Snow blanketed the pines, turning the mountains into a white wasteland that seemed endless. Rhett stirred the embers of the fire, checking the cabin for any sign of intrusion during the night. Outside, fresh tracks had begun to appear, not his, not Sloane's, but others. Footprints leading from the nearby town, crunching through the fresh snow. "They're coming," Nora said softly, standing near the window. Her eyes followed the tracks, wary but alert. People from the town. Rhett's jaw tightened. Why would they? He didn't finish. He already knew. Rumors traveled faster than facts in a frontier town. Word of Dagger Sloane, of a cabin in the mountains, of a lone woman harboring danger. They'd follow it, bring it here. Minutes later, a cluster of mounted townsfolk appeared, cautious but determined. At their lead was Sheriff Calloway, his face hard under a thick, frost-lined hat. Behind him, several men held ropes, rifles slung across their shoulders, eyes sharp. Rhett stepped outside, rifle in hand, snow crunching under his boots. "What the hell are you doing here?" he demanded. "We tracked you," the sheriff said, voice gruff. "Word of the outlaw. Word that someone's been aiding him." His gaze flicked to Nora, accusing. "And you, Miss Haley, the town says you've been sheltering Sloane." Nora's lips pressed into a thin line. Her hands went to the fur on the bed instinctively, as if she could protect herself from words as well as bullets. "I've done nothing wrong," she said quietly, voice steady despite the tension. "I found something he left behind. I didn't help him." Rhett's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer to her, hands still gripping his rifle. "She's telling the truth," he said, voice low but sharp enough to carry. "No one's aiding anyone. You're here because you're afraid of a storm in the mountains, nothing more." The sheriff frowned, skeptical. "Storm or not, the law's the law. You can't hide people or criminals out here." Rhett's temper flared. "She's not a criminal, and you're not taking her as bait." His voice cracked like a whip in the cold air. Around them, the snow swirled, masking the pines and rocks, adding a white tension to the standoff. The townsfolk murmured among themselves, uneasy, caught between loyalty to their lawman and suspicion of the stranger in the cabin. They had seen too much bandits, lost travelers, bodies frozen in the snow. Every rumor carried weight. "I don't care what your law says," Rhett continued, stepping closer to Nora, protective, unyielding. "She stays. We wait. That's final." Nora's hand brushed against his arm, small, almost imperceptible. A silent thank you, or perhaps a signal that she felt safer with him here, against the world. Rhett's heart clenched, reminded of his sister, of promises he had failed to keep, of the weight of protecting someone who mattered. The sheriff's eyes flicked between them. He saw the fire in Rhett's expression, the defiance, and hesitated. "We'll be back," he said finally, voice low but carrying a warning. "You'd better hope this ends well. Outlaws don't come alone." He turned his horse, the men following. The tracks in the snow grew faint as they retreated, leaving the cabin isolated once again. Rhett exhaled slowly, lowering his rifle, and turned to Nora. She was pale, but her stance was strong, shoulders squared despite the close call. He noticed the firelight from the stove reflected in her eyes, the flicker of determination that matched his own. "You all right?" he asked, voice softer now, almost concerned. "I will be," she said. "Thanks for sticking up for me." Rhett's gaze lingered on her, something unspoken passing between them. They weren't safe yet. The town had left, but the danger hadn't. Sloane was still out there, waiting, calculating. And now, with the townsfolk circling closer than ever, the tension pressed in from all sides. For the first time, they weren't just two people surviving a storm. They were a target, and every move mattered. Trust had to be fast and absolute, or someone wouldn't make it through the next encounter. Rhett turned back to the door, snow crunching under his boots. "We need to prepare," he said, voice steady. "Storm or no storm, he's coming. And when he does, we're ready." Nora nodded. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Survival had never felt so personal. And with the law and the outlaw both closing in, the cabin no longer felt like shelter. It was the front line. The mountains loomed outside, silent and unforgiving. And Rhett knew the night ahead would test everything. Loyalty, courage, and the fragile bond growing between him and the woman who now carried the echoes of his past. The storm returned that night, fiercer than before, hurling snow against the cabin like white-hot knives. Inside, the fire sputtered, casting jittering shadows across the walls. Rhett Marston moved silently, checking the boards on the windows, rifle in hand, ears straining for any sound above the wind. Nora sat on the bed, knees pulled to her chest, staring at the floor. The locket rested in her hand, cold metal against her palm, a reminder of the life she had never asked to be part of. You doubt me," she said finally, voice barely above the wind's howl. Rhett froze. The words struck him like a bullet. "I don't," he said, but it came out harsher than he intended. He stopped, swallowing. The memories of his sister, the guilt, the fear, all roiled inside him. He didn't know how to bridge the chasm between caution and trust anymore. "You do," she whispered. "I can see it. And the way you watch me, the way you hold back. You're afraid of losing someone again." Her accusation dug into him deeper than any storm, and Rhett felt the familiar tightness in his chest. The locket, her presence, the peril they were in, it all clawed at the scarred spaces in him. His sister's face flashed behind his eyes, the little hand slipping from his grasp, the promise broken. And now he feared repeating it. I can't," he started, but the words failed him. "You can't trust me," she finished for him, tears brimming in her gray eyes. "You won't, and if you can't, I have to do this alone." Before he could protest, she rose, grabbing her coat and slinging it around her shoulders. Snow had already begun to seep in through the cracks at the door. Her boots crunched against the wooden floor as she stepped toward the door, determination burning through the fear. "I'll face him alone," she said. "I'll survive even if you don't believe in me." Rhett lunged, catching her arm, his grip hard. "No, you can't go out there alone. You don't. Let go." She snapped, wrenching free. The fury in her voice matched the storm outside, a tempest that mirrored his own helplessness. "You can't keep everyone alive. Not everyone. And not me." Rhett's hands dropped to his sides, the rifle almost slipping from his grasp. He stepped back, breath ragged, heart pounding in his chest. She was right. He couldn't protect everyone. He hadn't protected his sister, and now he might fail again. Nora pulled the door open, snow gusting in immediately, whipping at her hair and coat. Rhett froze, powerless, watching her silhouette against the white abyss outside. The storm swallowed her, and for a moment, he was paralyzed by the fear, the guilt, the helplessness. Then the wind shifted, carrying a faint sound through the blizzard, a gunshot, distant, but sharp. Rhett's stomach sank. He should have followed her, restrained her, but he had let his own fear and guilt keep him frozen. He turned back to the cabin, pacing, his mind racing. Every mistake he had made in the mountains, every loss he had suffered, now bore down on him with suffocating weight. He had to act. He had to stop repeating the past. "Damn it," he muttered, voice low but firm. His eyes fell on the locket lying on the table, its silver glint catching the firelight. The memory of his sister surged again, mingled with the image of Nora disappearing into the storm. The weight of history pressed down on him, and something snapped. Rhett grabbed his rifle, slinging it over his shoulder, and stepped toward the door. The snow gusted, the wind screaming, but he pushed forward, determination hardening with each step. He would not fail her. He would not let the past claim another life because of his hesitation. Outside, the mountains were a white void, each tree a phantom, each drift a wall of ice. He could barely see Nora, barely track her through the storm, but he could feel her. And he would find her. The storm roared around him, relentless, unforgiving, but But Rhett Marston's resolve was sharper than any wind. He was going after her, and nothing, not snow, not guilt, not fear, would stop him from reaching her before Sloane did. The mountains swallowed him, and somewhere in the storm, a figure struggled against the wind. Two fates were about to collide, and the fragile trust they had built was about to be tested in the fire of survival. The storm had begun to ease, but the mountains remained a frozen labyrinth of white. Rhett Marston pushed forward, snow biting at his face, boots sliding over hidden rocks, rifle tight in his grip. Every step carried the memory of his sister, the weight of past failures, and the urgent need to reach Nora before the outlaw did. Through a narrow pass, he spotted her, Nora, crouched behind a fallen pine, breath ragged, eyes scanning the tree line. Her coat was streaked with snow, hair plastered to her face, but her stance was resolute. She had survived this long, but now the danger was closer than ever. A figure emerged from the drifted pines, dagger Sloane, tall, menacing, eyes cold but calculating. In his hand a pistol glinted, reflecting the gray winter light. Rhett's pulse quickened. This was it. The moment that would test everything he had feared, everything he had tried to control. "Step away," Sloane commanded, voice calm but edged with menace. "Don't make this messy." Rhett's rifle rose, steady despite the adrenaline. "Leave her alone, Sloane," he said. "It's over." Sloane smirked, tilting his head. "Is it? She's got something I want, and I don't leave empty-handed." His eyes flicked to the locket around Nora's neck. Rhett's breath caught. It was his sister's locket, but now he finally understood. Sloane hadn't stolen it from him. He'd taken it from a traitor months ago, and it had passed into Nora's hands by chance. "You don't want to do this," Rhett warned, voice low but firm. "Step back." Sloane raised his pistol, but in that instant Nora acted. She lunged, shoving him sideways, creating a small distraction. Rhett took the moment, moving with precision honed from years tracking men like Sloane. The first shot rang out, not to kill, but to disarm. A blur of movement, a struggle through snow and ice. Rhett grabbed Sloane, hands locked on the man's coat, twisting, forcing him down. Nora, breathing hard, pressed the locket into Rhett's hand. She started, voice trembling, but he shook his head. There was no time for words. They fought together, movement synchronized despite the chaos. The outlaw underestimated them both. Each strike, each push was desperate, fueled by survival and raw trust. Snow sprayed around them like confetti in a frozen battlefield, turning the mountainside into a blur of white, fire and motion. Finally Sloane stumbled, caught between Rhett's unyielding grip and Nora's defiant shove. He fell into the snow, rifle skidding away. Rhett's breath came in ragged gasps, heart hammering in his chest. "It's over," he growled. Sloane's eyes darted between them, calculating escape, but the weight of their alliance, of combined resolve, pinned him. He snarled, chest heaving, then finally gave in, defeated. Rhett's hands didn't relax until he knew the man was incapacitated, no threat remaining. Nora sank to her knees, hands gripping the snow. Rhett approached slowly, brushing snow from her coat, searching her face. "You okay?" His voice was softer now, almost tender. She nodded, swallowing hard. "Thanks for not letting me face him alone." Rhett's gaze lingered on her, then shifted to the locket in his hand. He traced the silver chain with a thumb, the weight of the past and present mingling. It wasn't his to keep, and it wasn't yours to bear alone. She met his eyes, a faint smile breaking through the exhaustion. "Then we're even?" Rhett allowed a small, dry laugh. Something like that. Together they trudged back toward the cabin, each step heavier with snow, but lighter with the bond that had formed between them. Trust had been earned in the heat of survival, and the remnants of fear melted in the wake of shared triumph. The mountains had tested them, tried to claim them, but they had emerged. Scarred but stronger, bound by more than necessity, bound by trust, by survival, and by the quiet sparks of something neither had expected. The storm had passed, leaving the landscape quiet, pristine, and unforgiving. Yet inside Rhett and Nora a warmth lingered, proof that even in the harshest winters, redemption was possible, and new beginnings could bloom from frozen ground. They paused at the cabin door. Rhett held the locket out to her. "It belongs with me now," he said softly, "but I'll keep it safe. For both of us." Nora accepted it, letting him place it in his coat pocket. Their hands brushed, and this time neither pulled away. Outside, the mountains stood silent, the snow glinting in the morning sun. Inside, the fire crackled, the cabin safe once more. And for the first time in a long time, Rhett Marston allowed himself to hope. Spring crept into the Montana territory, slowly, painting the mountains with hints of green beneath the retreating snow. The cabin, once half buried and battered by winter storms, now stood solid and warm, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. Inside, Rhett Marston moved with deliberate care, stacking firewood and checking the stove while Nora Hull sorted through supplies. Her movements efficient, precise, confident. The town had calmed, whispers of the outlaw fading into memory. The sheriff and his men had reluctantly accepted Rhett's account, clearing Nora of any wrongdoing. Trust, grudging but real, had begun to form, and for the first time the weight of isolation outside the cabin no longer felt suffocating. It felt like choice, like freedom. Rhett stepped outside, breathing in the crisp spring air, the sun glinting on the thawing snow. His eyes swept the mountains, empty, silent, no signs of Dagger Sloan, no threats lingering in the shadows. For a moment he allowed himself to relax, letting the tension seep from his shoulders. Nora joined him, carrying a bundle of herbs she had gathered for the cabin. She set it down beside the porch and watched him quietly, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "It feels peaceful," she said softly. Rhett nodded. "Too peaceful," he admitted, though the tension in his tone lacked the usual edge. There was no storm outside to fight, no outlaw to track. Just the quiet rhythm of survival and rebuilding. They worked together, hammering new boards into the cabin, tending the fire, and clearing the path from the cabin to the spring. Every motion was deliberate, every glance a silent acknowledgment of what they had survived together. The bond between them, forged in winter's fury, had deepened into something stronger, something unspoken yet undeniable. At one point, Rhett pulled a small box from his coat pocket and handed it to Nora. Inside lay the silver locket, worn from its journey but still gleaming. "I thought it belonged with me," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "But now, I think it belongs to both of us. A reminder of what we've survived." Nora's fingers brushed his as she took it. She looked up at him, eyes soft but steady. "We've earned that," she said, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had faced fear and come through stronger. They hung the locket by the doorframe, just above the threshold, a small symbol of resilience, memory, and new beginnings. Rhett stepped back, hands on his hips, surveying the cabin. The sun caught the silver chain, glinting warmly in the morning light. It was a simple gesture, but for both of them, it carried weight heavier than any rifle or winter storm. The sound of horses' hooves on the newly thawed trail reminded them that life in the frontier never truly stopped. A few townsfolk approached cautiously, some nodding, others lingering at the edge of the tree line, curiosity mingled with respect. Rhett met their eyes without defensiveness, his posture firm but non-threatening. Nora walked beside him, shoulders squared, carrying herself with the quiet strength she had always possessed. The sheriff rode forward, tipping his hat. "Cabin looks sturdy," he said, voice neutral but respectful. "Glad to see you both made it through." Rhett inclined his head. "We did. Thanks to each other." Nora smiled faintly, a soft warmth breaking through the lines of winter's hardships. Together they watched the town fade back into the distance, the mountains rising above like silent guardians. Later, as the evening light bathed the cabin in gold, Rhett and Nora sat on the porch steps, hands brushing as they worked together to repair the final boards and tend the fire. The air was filled with quiet conversation, laughter muted by the mountains, the scent of pine and wood smoke wrapping around them like a promise. The locket glinted in the doorway, a symbol not of loss, but of survival, trust, and the fragile beauty of starting again. For Rhett, it marked a closure he had never thought possible. For Nora, it marked the beginning of a life reclaimed. And for both of them, it was proof that even in the harshest frontier, Amidst storms and shadows, love, trust, and resilience could bloom. The mountains held their silence. The cabin stood strong, and the two of them, side by side, finally felt at home. Did you enjoy Rhett and Nora's story? Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next thrilling frontier adventure.